things that have covered a lot in other workshops. If I wanted to open a command prompt and I wanted to, can't see, what? If I wanted to open an invisible command prompt, okay. Let's mirror. All right. That's a little bit better. I don't think that I can code on a screen that I can't see. So we know things like OpenFL, or really Lime, and OpenFL on top of Lime has command tools. And those tools include, hey, we've got samples for all kinds of stuff. And we can go ahead and create something like NeonCat is fun. And looks like it's taking a little while because I probably built that for C++, and I've got a couple hundred megs of stuff that is copied with my sample. And we can tell it to test to anything. We can say we want to test it to Nico, and Nico is perfect for testing a NeonCat. And I don't remember it taking that long. It's probably generating icon files. Oh no. What have I done? Uh-oh. This is why they tell you not to do live demos. Just don't do it. You spend your whole talk trying to fix your demo. Rebuild the things. So anyway, so we know that it's like, let me spend time fixing things so that it does what we all know that it already does. You can create a project. You can say OpenFL test, and you can make it run in all kinds of things. You can test it for the web using JavaScript. You can test it for the web using WebAssembly and Emscripten, if you get the Emscripten compiler to work okay that day. You can, and I'm sure that with other code bases, it's always just exactly which libraries you're using, with which header, and if it gets a little bit particular about, oh no, we think you're using SIMD, SIMD. I don't know how to pronounce the acronyms. Yeah, good night. I've been working on Swift stuff, and all right, so let's try bailing, and we'll install whatever is on Haxelab. Give that a shot. So just abandon the, close your eyes and don't look at GitHub. Just let that be a mess over there, and we'll just go on back. No, I think that I've been poking around at some of the architecture there without realizing it. So, and so this is all a paradigm of I'm going to create one project, and this project is going to go everywhere. So on a whim, I could say, you know what, instead of being web, I'm going to go native, and we'll pull the C++ lever and see what happens, and look, it's a real application, except, oh, I forgot to put in the Android NDK. And so then you set up the NDK and pull the lever and oops, I forgot I need to have Java on my machine. And then you pull the lever and oh, it does run on Android, and it is the same thing, and oh, that's pretty sweet, pretty cool. But there are the other days or projects really, where the multiple targets isn't really the important thing. And we want to invert this process. So OpenFL by default uses a workflow that is inverted from most other frameworks. You don't have your project. You don't have your file structure with your native dependencies and files. We'll figure that out for you. You just write your content, and then just trust us to generate an Android project, to generate an iOS project, and with the expectation that that will be blown away every time. And it doesn't matter, because those details don't matter to you. If they do matter, you can override specific files and things like that, but otherwise, you just want this thing to be portable and flexible. If 2 years later, we've had to push the Android project forward to a newer version, we've had to, we changed from Ant to Gradle and these other types of changes, You don't want to have to mess with that stuff. You don't want to have to think about it. You just want to be able to say, test Android and have the thing work. So that's great, if that's what you're doing. But if you're working on a project which is more traditional, where you say, I'm working on this one platform and I want it to work for this one platform, having all of your template files blown away every time is a little bit of a nuisance if you want to customize anything. So we've really made the most strides in this area using for JavaScript. And the goal, one of the goals, and I say goal loosely because development time isn't being really invested in this, but something that I'd be interested in seeing as contributors to the library and to Haxe in general is paving the roads for taking libraries like OpenFL and making it accessible directly from native code, so that OpenFL is now basically DLL, and you can write C, C++, and just use the thing. And you don't have to know that it was written in Haxe or really think about it very much. It's just a library you consume and you use. So that's a lot easier to do for the web. And so that's where, let me see if I have my yo command. I do have a yo command. OK. So one of the things I wanted to go over was looking at the web target, and you might not be interested in HTML5 very much. And it's like, it's not really my thing. But it's really the approach of, we're taking Haxe and we're bringing it outside of the traditional, your entry point is your HXML or a line project, and then we'll build out to these different targets. And instead, it's a paradigm of, this is just the web, and we want to build for the web. And yeah, we're consuming a library that's been built for the web. We have a generator project for OpenFL that's compatible with Yeoman. So anything on the web nowadays is going to involve npm, basically. So npm install, and you can do -g to make it global, Yeoman installs the, not found. CoffeeScript's been moved, not actively maintained. COI is deprecated. Good night, people. I'll just pretend that didn't happen. And let me see. So if I wanted to create a new project, I'll call it, I don't think samples is a very good name for it. Oh, right. It's because it creates it in the current directory. It doesn't create a folder for it like the Lime tools do. So I'll make a directory, and we'll call it the Haxe Summit Workshop 2. Because, you know, if you ever name something as like final, and then final, and really final, and so on, we'll just call it 2, because we're going to end up with a 3 or a 5 or something before we know it. So we'll do Haxe, because this is the Haxe conference, and that's good news. But really, in this approach, it doesn't matter if the user is writing in TypeScript or writing in JavaScript. But it is cool. I really appreciate Haxe has been bundled up for NPM. So in NPM, you can just say npm install Haxe, and then it will go ahead and figure out what architecture you're using, what platform, and it'll download that for you. And then it's local. So a Haxe install, traditionally, outside of using licks, which I can't use it because of the name. Even for no other reason, something called licks is just, I don't want to complain too much. But we all have our personal struggles. I struggle with something that I just see the band Kiss or something else like that, and I think, no, I don't want that touching my Haxe install. So I may be alone in this. So just bear with me as I have a global Haxe install. It's one global Haxe install. If I want to test a project on Haxe 3 instead of Haxe 4, I am clobbering my global install, and I reinstall Haxe every time I want to switch. It's not the prettiest thing, but the npm library for Haxe is isolated. It's modular. So this project has this version of Haxe, that project has that version, and that's fine. It doesn't really matter. So if I I'll open this in VS Code so we can see what this looks like. Now, does anyone mind that I'm using a light theme, or should we go dark theme for, because that's how you make the big dollars nowadays. The new feature is dark. So that's, we'll just let me know if you don't feel like it's legible or something else. So like in this project, this is designed to be a Haxe-based project. So every NPM project starts with a package.json. And in our package.json, our dependencies, we have Haxe, and we haven't installed it yet. I'll start that now. So if I npm install, I forget, oh wait, Yeoman did npm install. So it's going to check and go, yep, you've already got it. So that last step there, haxlib install build hxml, so I should have, we'll double check it to see, in my modules, I should have Haxe in here. Yep. And there should be a bin. And so here's my binaries for Haxe and haxlib and Nico. So it's isolated in this one project. And it's possible to change which version you have. I don't have it in this template, but there's a way to say, do I get code completion? Maybe not. But there's a field that you can add to say which version of Haxe you want, or when it installs, do you want it to install a couple extra haxlibs or something else like that. Another way you can do it, you can add in npm dependencies, you can add a git reference, and so long as that project has a package.json, which is a bit annoying in my opinion. So I have some forks of Haxe libraries, like the Haxe format library. My fork adds an empty package.json, so that I can include it as an npm dependency from Git and move on. Sort of a hack, but we got to ship our code, right? And so hacks or hacking is part of the game. So I have Haxe version 5. It's really just the npm package 5. It'll install multiple versions of Haxe. Haxe loader is fun. So in this sample, we're using Webpack. Webpack will take separate modules and glob them all together. And so that's how the JavaScript community does dead code elimination. They'll glob modules together, and then they'll shake the tree, so to speak, and see whatever isn't being referenced and not include that in the final JavaScript file. When you're using Haxe, it can do dead code elimination with much higher precision. And so you don't necessarily need that. But the Haxe loader is nice because that will automatically recompile our code once we start running a dev server. So if I start, my start, that's saying run, and I have a script called start, which runs a script called start dev. And start dev is, I want the Webpack dev server. I want it to open my browser for me, and I have a Webpack config. Now when this boots up, so it's still working on it back here, it's globbing the world together, figuring out what part of OpenFL I'm referencing, and globbing that together with my Haxe code. And it doesn't really look like anything because my app.hx doesn't really do anything. But if I create a new sprite, and we'll just make it red because that's just the way of things. Now, I probably should do Windows. Wait, that's the wrong window. What have I done? So if I save that, there is my box, and I can change X to 100, Y to 200, save it. So about a 4-second delay or something on my machine right now. But it's even just that purpose alone. Now we recently in the Lime tools added a -npm flag that you can use for HTML5 builds. And it will attempt to do the same workflow. So in theory, you can do OpenFL test HTML5, do a -npm flag, And instead of spitting out a traditional just here's the JavaScript, it'll generate an NPM-based project, try and use Webpack for that so that you can do a hot reload server like this to speed up your workflow. But honestly, the benefits of being able to go up, forget it. The benefits, it's really great as well because like if we go to the OpenFL website, for example, and we go to learn, and there's some tutorials about, I'm doing adding animation. This is more interesting. So adding animation, we have the OpenFL logo, and then we could add animation using an enter frame event. That's going to be dependent on how often this fires. So if I switch to my high refresh rate monitor, it's going to run twice as fast. And that's not necessarily what you want. So you could use a timer and have a base time. And timers are okay, but your timer isn't going to necessarily be in sync with the frames of when you're actually rendering. So using a timer by itself isn't necessarily best either for anything visual. So then you can do a compromise between the two where you only render on a frame, but you use a timer to know whether it's actually time to animate. This is the way that Actuate works and most any tweening library that's worth its salt, so that the double refresh rate monitor renders twice as fast, but the objects still move at the same speed. And this is also super important for reducing perceived latency in a game. Any game that I've ever seen that's strictly on a frame-by-frame timer, you start dropping frames, and the user goes, oh, what happened? It got slow. But if you don't do that and you use actual time, I've seen a 60 frames per second game drop down to like 15 frames for even half a second or something like that, and the user not necessarily realizing because everything still moved at the same speed. Traditional hand-drawn animation oftentimes is done at 12 frames a second, and your brain still connects it. So, so that's helpful. And then this goes into, hey, we could use a library and get all fancy pants about it. But what's interesting here, other than so we have parallel code samples of how you could do this. Us as the developers of the library, we want to use Haxe. Haxe is just game saving. But for the user, if they want to use Haxe, they don't. They can pick. But what's interesting is that if we want to look at the sources of our platform icons, what am I missing? I don't know what I'm missing. I'll just do it by element to find what I'm looking for. So here's embed. Oh, there it is. There's my script. So right here, I'll try and make it a bit bigger, easier to read. Right here on my page, we have a function closure to keep things nice. And rather than using a traditional import, it's just referencing a global OpenFL display bitmap and so on. And then the rest of it is the code. Now, because this is ES5 JavaScript, it looks a little bit different than, honestly, it really makes you appreciate how Haxe is trying to kind of fix JavaScript a little bit, like with scoping. This, yo dog, I heard you like this, so I this, you're this. Like the number of times you have to use this in complex JavaScript is tiring, but also things like this bind here to make sure that our callback actually still has the same scope of the original. Anyway, so stuff like that aside, what we have here, this was handwritten and it's just dropped into the web page. And now this is something that's stable. It doesn't have to change. This is a code sample, a tutorial. I don't need this tutorial to be rewritten. We write the tutorial. You can copy paste from the tutorial into a script tag, make a few tweaks to turn it to dumb it down for JavaScript in a sense. And this is all pulling off of, we should have up here, here's OpenFL off a CDN. So we use a CDN, there's OpenFL, and that can cache in the user system, and we just know that the rest of the website, we have OpenFL, and we've committed to a version. if we want to update to a newer version of OpenFL, we can do that. Now this approach is working okay for, our whole website here is built in Jekyll. It's a static website generator, and we're not really using NPM for this. But say I was making a more advanced web application, and I wanted to integrate OpenFL into that workflow, an advanced web application more likely would be following an approach like our, I wonder where that icon is coming from. I'm not sure. Anyway, but like our sample here, where all of my code is running through Webpack and it's globbing it together. And then Webpack can get really creative about, okay, well, but what about this asset? And well, I want to load it later. And no, actually, I want to bundle 2/3 of my content immediately, and then I want the other third to be available later. And when you get into larger applications, you run into that, where you want to have the splash screen as lightweight as possible. But then by the time you get to the login screen, you want to have a little bit more. Or maybe you actually want to get the login screen, and then you want to do a lot more so that it starts caching, so that when you start going deeper in, you already have it loaded. And Webpack is, I loved Philippe's talk from Haxe, the Haxe event like 2 years ago or something, where he showed it as like I think a particle accelerator. Is moving from one tool to the next. Moving to Webpack is like this giant, huge, massive piece of machinery with so many wires that we just have no idea what to do with it. So Webpack is one of those things where surely you'll find another way to use it. But what's cool here is that, again, our Haxe code, if we want to write it in Haxe, our Haxe code is being compiled on the fly. And we've also been able to do this with Swift assets, so that your Swift assets can be recompiled on the fly. So if I use the Swift loader instead of the Haxe loader, and that's actually how the NanCat sample is working. So if you were to open Adobe Animate, make some changes to it, and export out the Swift again, you would get a hot reload in the browser window, and you would have the new content in there. So that's kind of fun and cool. But another thing that this enables, is not trying Haxe, because we know we can try Haxe, and that, indeed, Haxe is great. But we also now have a try.openfl. And I've worked on getting a try.openfl that uses, I'm trying to remember what service was that. I'm trying to remember. It was a service, the art design of it was really sort of, it felt like animated GIFs everywhere type of an art design. But it was something where it's actually running a real Docker instance in the cloud. And so you're connecting to a VM, and in this VM, it'll let you run NPM, and then we could actually say, yeah, let's use the Haxe library. And then now we can have real Haxe compiling in the cloud, in a VM, but it looks and works like this. So this is sort of halfway there, because we have OpenFL and Haxe pre-compiled, and then we can leverage it with just JavaScript. But because it's JavaScript, it's all client-side, so thus it doesn't need the Docker instance, the VM, and all of those different things to connect, because I can't ask the browser to run haxe.exe for me. But I can say that I want to move my icon around, and it can just do that for me even more quickly than the other workflow. So if you're doing something small, you want to play around, this is kind of a fun way to do it. Sharing code samples is really easy to do this way. And this is based on the same premise as what we're doing back here, except this is more the way you would want to do it for a real project. So, what if I wanted to add something extra to this? So I could say, so for this project, I want to go ahead and install we'll try Tween Max, and we'll save it. Let's see if that did what I want. It did not. Maybe they called it green sock or something. font version. Well, I didn't strike out completely, so if I install GreenSock, I have GreenSock in my project now. In the node modules, it's there, and now I can reference it. So, let me see. What GreenSock looks like. Give me my basic API. So this is the point where you can do an import if you're using ES6 and start using it, and it's all dynamic. If you're using a TypeScript, you're going to want to have definitions and setting up the definitely typed library so that you get types on it. And this is where with Haxe, we'd be adding the either extra Haxe lib or just a little bit of untyped code to go ahead and reference it. But the point here, not to go deep into let's go use GreenSock. We know how to use a tween library and stuff like that. But that by being in this workflow, if I want to start reaching out to new tools, I can just reach out and do that. So to give you a bigger example of that, if we go back to OpenFL, we'll take kind of a jam through we'll look at some of the testing, but let me just go to, I'll do it from the command prompt. So go to OpenFL and go into test, and we have tests for npm, and we'll do Haxe and do an install in here. So when was wanted to broaden out our unit testing, one of the approaches that did for headless browser testing. So I still would like to see headless browser testing brought to munit, but today munit doesn't have support for that. So headless browser testing, it will fire off an instance of Firefox or Chrome invisibly on your system, run a bunch of tests on it, get the feedback out of it, and then close that instance. And so this is perfect for continuous integration or something else where you want to take your code, push it up to the cloud, and just let it send back a message to Discord or Slack or something else, hey, everything's good, or whoop, you just broke something. So if you break something, 3 minutes later or less, depends on how many tests you have and so on, it can potentially come back and give you, hey, there's a failure, and right while your brain is still where you were on your commit, you go, oh, oops, and you can go fix that. So wanted to have headless browser testing, and there's a library called Mocha, Mocha.js, that had support for this. And so taking OpenFL and putting it through the sort of the NPM approach, we could take OpenFL and glue it together with Mocha.js and run it through Webpack to now combine the two. And so again, in integration in a final environment, I think that this is important. And I want to be able to demo this in a year for native. To be able to say, I had an iOS app and it's all written in Swift, but there was this one component that was perfect for OpenFL, and we just combined the two together, and here's our release. It's possible to do that with OpenFL now, but it's not turnkey. And there would be rough edges to try and figure out. So in the meantime, we will wait for the libraries to extract while NPM is working. But let me look at the code for it. Ended up running the tests in a couple different languages just to make sure that our bindings were working okay for OpenFL as a JavaScript library. So our build HXML is going out to this is local to OpenFL, so it's referencing OpenFL, and then it's going into a main class which has an import for every one of the tests that I wanted to do for Mocha to make sure that all of them got included in the build. And also I guess I'm not here. I thought that I had done an import. I guess I did that elsewhere. So for Mocha, instead of using a whole Haxe lib for proper externs for everything it could possibly do, or maybe I did cover it and it doesn't have that many APIs, ended up with these two. So if you've never done externs in Haxe before, it's really easy to do. It's the same as defining a class, but nothing has a body. Everything has no body. There is no body on anything. Take your pick on the grammar on one of those. So we say there's an extern class. This exists in the browser when we run. So native, I said that this is global, and that means that this is actually available in the global scope. There is no object called Mocha. So in JavaScript, you would not run mocha.after. You would just run after. And it's been exposed by the library. So that's Mocha, and then we also have an assert class to go with it. It's the same thing, but it's lowercase. But you can also you can completely rewrite it. That's how you can do jQuery being a $sign or all kinds of other things like that. You can have nice classes that feel nice in Haxe. But if I was going to do this again, I probably would add an import.hx and say we're automatically going to import our assert and Mocha classes. We could do the auto-using stuff. We're going to auto-using as well so that these things are just available and we can run it. Now, if we get into a test, let me think. Sprite is pretty basic. So Mocha has this way of working where everything's in a closure. So you describe the name of the test, and then you the name of the sub test that you're doing, and so on. So I've got it all set up here in Haxe code, and that looks like it's done. So now I believe it's called start, but we'll just, where's the package JSON? Let's see what test npm run. Oh, I see. So I put the script at the top level. So if I npm run test Haxe, is that what I called it? Yep. So I'll open the top level package JSON for OpenFL. We have test Haxe. We're going to build the test, and then we're going to run Mocha Chrome with the HTML page. And we have old and busted because that's what they called. I want this to work on older browsers. I think that's what you need to allow any level of Internet Explorer, I think, is old and busted. So we'll try run test Haxe. So first it built, it finished building. Now it's, is that right? Oh, no, it's saying to run test Haxe, we run the build test Haxe, which now is running the Haxe compiler. And then here's our test running. And I didn't set my code page to 65,001. So we have, this is supposed to be a check mark, but we can just pretend. And so I have 880 tests that are passing. But again, this was really neat because without going the level of, well, let's bring headless browser testing to MUnit, that would be great. I think that would be great. I like MUnit because it's designed for practically every Haxe target, whereas Mocha.js is designed only for the web. So I can test the web here, but oh no, how am I going to test native? And then I have to do something else. MUnit covers that, but what it doesn't have are certain features like this that a dedicated library has currently. I can just go ahead and benefit from that. So in this case, the npm release of OpenFL is only going to the web. So if I only test it in the web, that's fine. So if I only use a unit testing library that works for the web, it's like, well, that's all I needed. And this can now run in continuous integration and rubber stamp what we're doing. But But again, by doing this, this really was taking OpenFL and getting it into the NPM environment first. And once we're in that environment, we looked at those somewhere here. I thought it was somewhere here. Oh yeah, right here. We looked at these externs. There's an extern for Mocha, 6 lines, and there's an extern for cert. Yeah, it's a little bit longer, but I think what I actually did is it was close enough to the M unit or another assert class that I copy pasted that and then just renamed the names if I needed to get that thing working. And then that's done. And if someone else wants to use Mocha.js, there we have some externs for it, and we can move on. So I feel like this is kind of an important piece of the puzzle that Haxe allows us to do so much that there's kind of a last mile that's missing. And the OpenFL tools and Lime tools are designed to do that last mile for you. So when you say, I want to go to Flash, we're going to take you all the way. It's running, you have your trace output, and you're done. When you want to go to Android, we're going to build it, we're going to package it, we're going to install it, we're going to run it, we're going to get ADB debug back, and we're going to take you all the way. We're not going to say, hey, you want to visit Paris? Well, I'll send you on an airplane, we'll drop you off in Germany, and you should be thankful you're in the right continent. Like, you're pretty close if you can figure out, I think that you get the right words in the dictionary and can figure out how to convert it into German and ask for a bus back to Paris. Like, don't want to do that to developers. So that's why OpenFL, we have those tools. But again, that works well if you're doing something that fits in that box. I have a game, I want it to run on my Android phone. Done. But what if you have an app and you want only part of it to be interactive, and you want part of it to be native UI, and part of it to be, that's where it gets a little bit more complicated. So in the same way for the web, I think that this has been a really important approach. So I'm trying to remember. So it's going to talk about multiple embeds, and this is one example of how that can be done. So just using one copy of OpenFL. Doesn't have to be off of a CDN, but why not? And so this page has multiple copies of OpenFL. And by the way, if you use OpenFL this way, really the one difference between this and the Haxe one, if you throw out the templating, because obviously there's no templating anymore, is that stage has a constructor. So I want elements. So if I look at this element, get the script, we end up with stage. I can say new stage, and I can give it a size, and I can optionally give it a background color or a type to be the document class. You don't have to do that. You could just make a stage and then add child to the stage. But that's the way that we approached handling OpenFL outside of all that templating, outside of having a project XML. You can just say new stage. Now I have a stage. It has an element attached to it. You can put that on your DOM somewhere, and that's your web stuff. So if you want to embed it 2 times, 3 times, just create 3 stages, embed your elements wherever, and you're done. Now, it is possible to do this with the HaxeLib approach, but it's a little bit trickier. Now, I could show that if anyone's interested, or I could just say it. Either way. Is anyone interested in the idea of how do I take 2 OpenFL projects that go to HTML5, but post them in the same page while still using the OpenFL test command? Is anyone interested in that? No? Tough crowd? Yeah, so the principle there is that you would have 2 different project files, or one file with 2 different defines, and it would build out to the same directory, but whichever one you build second uses a custom template so that the index.html has 2 embeds instead of 1. So instead of having the standard template with 1 embed, you want a custom template with 2. And so then you can run your builds. And that's where you would want to get into using a script of some form. And so you could use bash for that. You could use batch for that. You could use the haxe run or haxe.x command. Or where we ended up developing the HXP library. Oh, I forgot that does stuff in here. So that's what I was peeking at. So so HXP is a library in HaxeLib that's designed to wrap that Haxe eval functionality. So for example, this script here is all written in Haxe, and this was designed to help automate some of the stuff that we're doing. So I'm not going to go into all the details of HXP, except to say that when I run HXP, it's the same as running HXP defaults, and because I believe it's in this order, and no, I bet it's this order, something like that. So when I ran HXP, it was kind of the same as doing this. No, I think it's the .hx. So there are a couple default names it'll look for, and if you have one of those files, running HXP in that directory will just execute that as a Haxe script. If it's named something else, you could do something like, you could give the name to the file, or you could just say like HXP build. And if you have a build.hx or build.hxp, it'll prefer that. But if you just have a generic script.hx or something, it'll use that. And you can have you can have as many arguments as you want, but the default parsing for arguments expects you might have a command and then arguments attached to that command. So in this case, I believe we'll see if this works. So if I HXP unit test, then what it did is it's running Haxe eval over this, and it extends HXP script to bootstrap kind of the basic parsing and stuff like that. And when the command is unit test, the command is test unit, okay? And if it's test unit, then we test and we run a unit test script. And so here, we'll ignore that. This is probably something where I haven't rebuilt the dev version of OpenFL for npm. Anyway, so when I ran HXP unit test, it was executing the script. I had a script for unit testing, which said I want to go into a directory and run munit. So this is munit running on the Nico target to do some testing really quick. Function test is test HaxeLib. Yeah, so our directory is a combination of our current working directory plus test HaxeLib unit. And so we go in, we run a command in that directory. We call HaxeLib run munit. We generate the munit tests, and then we run the munit tests. I have it separated because we have an optional filter command where when you generate the munit tests, you can filter and not have you can have a test runner that will only run a few of your tests. So I separate it into two steps. Instead of generating a runner for every test, we'll generate a runner for specific tests, then run it, and then see the output. But all this stuff can get wrapped up nicely, can forget about it, can use it as a throwaway script the same way you would do with a bash file. But the nice thing is that this will work on Windows, it'll work on Linux and Mac as well. And I'm using Haxe, so I can even use framework code. I could create an OpenFL matrix in here. I don't know why that would help me run my command, but I could. And so anyway, if you wanted to build two projects, get them into one place, potentially you could also do something like using an HXP script, where you can say, I'm going to do OpenFL test, and I'm going to do OpenFL test or build. I'll OpenFL build 2 times, and then I'll copy some files, and then you can script some of that stuff, keep it in Haxe, don't repeat yourself, and do some fun stuff with it. So I'm trying to think. So I think that a lot of this stuff is maybe not so specific to what your guys are doing. I do think that it helps paint a picture, though, of this is what it looks like when we take a Haxe library and we modularize it. So now we have more flexibility where we can opt into everything or not. Let's look. This may be exciting or embarrassing. We'll see. All right, so this week we have 179 downloads. Now, truth be told, I don't download things every week when I use it. And we've got a spike of 10,000. So somewhere between 173 and 10,000, I think. In my experience, I have seen developers attracted to the project, and you guys might know this or have seen this as well. We also support Starling. That's a little bit more disappointing, three this week. But we also support Starling for JavaScript, TypeScript, and so on. So the question is whether developers start in JavaScript or attracted because of JavaScript but end up becoming Haxe developers. In my experience, a lot of people are afraid of using Haxe because it seems unfamiliar and I don't really understand it. And it's sad that it's this way, but I oftentimes see people using Haxe as a last resort. And then when they finally have exhausted enough options that, okay, I'll use Haxe, then they go, oh, wow, this was even better than this was better than ActionScript. This is better than, why was I even using that other language? This is great. But you have to kind of ease them into it. So I have seen developers, hey, I like Starling and I want to use Starling, but I want to go to the web, so I'll try out this NPM version. And wait, but I can also publish to mobile if I use the Haxe version. Okay, well I'll switch to the Haxe version, and then they're just a Haxe Starling developer if they want it. And rather than stopping here, they'll go one step farther and they'll switch to Haxe if they want something more than Flash. Or in the case of OpenFL, I've seen it where a developer starts with NPM and they're using JavaScript or TypeScript, and then they end up, because we have the code samples side by side, and you can see that the code is really practically the same thing. When people want to stay in NPM, I don't necessarily see as many people who stick with Haxe. I wanted to do TypeScript. I have TypeScript in NPM, and they'll just kind of stop there and be happy and use the library. But inevitably end up sort of feeling, again, if they want to do anything outside of the web, sort of like, Haxe is practically the same as what I'm already doing, and it gives me superpowers. So I could have a normal project or a super project. And so, that makes, despite, I have seen a lot of interest in people approaching the library, but there are only one or two people that I can think of that really regularly still use it. After coming to the forums and talking about it and hearing other perspectives, almost every one of them I've seen has converted. Not because that's the secret plan exactly, but in another sense, if I did have a secret plan and I did want to convert people to Haxe, I think that this is a good way to do it because it removes the language as a barrier of entry. And they can say, okay, this looks like a cool framework. Yeah, I'll use it, and I can write it. And then they get their foot in the door, and they don't have to learn a language. They're learning a framework. Hey, this is a cool framework. I like this. But then realizing that, again, it's like, what if I told you? We could throw at the Amway pitch. What if I told you that your web project could also run natively for iPhone and for Android and for Nintendo Switch and practically anything else you ever want to do? How much would you pay me for that? Wouldn't you give your left leg? Wouldn't you subscribe to my newsletter for that? Wouldn't you? I don't know where the sell is eventually, but I wonder that as well. Again, with native, I think it's a more, there are different complexities to solve to do that. But I do wonder a little bit if we could take a Haxe library and release it as a DLL, and nobody really had to know that this is Haxe, really. I think that certainly it could increase the adoption of the library. And then as the adoption of the library increases, more people are coming back to invest in the library. And when they come back to work on the library, they're learning Haxe because that's what the library is written in. But then also, I think that it can lead to a conversion because, again, every tool is good for different things. But I still love that Haxe, among other languages, enables me to get my hands dirty with low-level pointers and bytecode, and then wash my hands and go up a level when I'm done doing that. Because even just, we've talked about Unicode enough times. Well, is it UTF-8, or is it UTF-16, or is it UTF-32, or is it UCS-2? Or is it stored as a wide string, or is it stored as a string? Or, Java, I don't even remember what that's called. It is UTF-8 LE or something else. It has its own encoding. And when you're writing at a low level, every one of these differences matter. But when you're thinking in terms of problems and solutions, at some point, and I think it's part of why JavaScript has become so popular, other than you don't have any other choices in the browser. But that aside, I think one of the reasons why it's become popular is that on a practical level of I have problems and I want to solve it, at some point, all the text variables fly in and out of your head, and then you just throw something. You say, I just want to say hello, and I just want to move on. That smiley thing, I just want that smile thing to be over here too, and I don't want to think about all the rest of this. It's too many details. And that's, we do that with our cars all the time. You open the car and it's all complicated, and the mechanic needs to understand that. But as a driver, you don't think about that. And not only do you not think about it, you don't want to think about it. It lets you think about the song on the radio or what you're going to do when you get to work or whatever else. You just push the accelerator, turn the steering wheel, and that's it. So there's a level where we want to be able to just drive. But then there's another level where, if you're in the car and it has no tires, you're not going to get very far. So there's that day when you realize, by golly, I need to have a real car, not like a Fisher-Price toy or something. And that happens with tech, like the easy stuff. Oh, this is a super easy framework and it's really easy to use. And, oh wait, you wanted to go outside the playground? No, I'm sorry, you can't do that. It's not powerful enough to do that. So anyway, that's kind of a dogmatic rant, but the trade-offs between having the power to go down deep and to make sure that all the features you need are there, but yet not having to be there all the time. And I feel like Haxe is sort of a Goldilocks solution that lets you sort of get it just right. Then on the days when you want to be more hardcore, you can be more hardcore. On the days where you want to be dynamic everything, I don't care. You can just do that too. Yeah, I don't know where to go from there. Does anyone have any other questions or question?
So if you're working in a HTML5 project and you're already using EMP, which cases would you use HXP?
So HXP would be a replacement for a batch file or a bash script. Here, I'll give you an example super quick. In the Lime samples, I was creating a minimal application sample. So this was the idea of we're going to create an application, but we're not going to use the Lime tools for it. And so what's required to build for these different platforms? And so I started generating a scripts directory. And here's my scripts directory. So how many targets do we have here? 8. So I have a separate HXML for each target that I want to build. You could do it in one HXML, but I don't want to build all of them all at once. If I'm iterating over one target, that's the only target I want to build. So we can assume that. But then each one, I also have to write it twice, once for Windows, once for Unix. So I might have a shell script and also the boilerplate of, did you run this script from the script directory or did you run it from the main directory? So getting boilerplate to try and avoid stuff like that. And then once I get that sorted out, yeah, I want to build it first, and then I might have something platform specific. And I'm going to go in there and I'm going to run ADL with the application XML. And here I'm checking, is there an error SDK variable? I forget what the +X is. Making sure that's not empty, and so if we have an error SDK, we'll look there. Otherwise, I'll just use a default path. Well, and it's sort of one of those things where it's a matter of can you, I mean, NPM scripts are a perfect example of something where, can you do that with Gradle? Can you do that with, like you can, but at some point it might be more convenient. And I think especially in this case, if you're wrapping enough functionality, maybe you're a whiz and you already know, oh, I want to know if this environment variable exists. But if you don't, and you're already writing in Haxe, it might be easier to just use the Haxe sys API or something else. I'll get the environment variables, it's a map, and I'm going to check for a couple different environment variables while I'm at it. How did this look in Windows? And yeah, so make sure that we're in the right directory. I always love this one. So if my script fails halfway, I want to exit my script with an error code so that other scripts don't continue, so we just don't continue running. But then you forget to put that in, then you put it in continuous integration, and you get false positives. It says everything's good, and you look at the log, and it's like, this is broken. Why isn't it throwing an error? And it's an issue like that. So anyway, I had all these different scripts, and so I could do it straight from here, or do it from this directory, say script / whichever script I want. But then when I ended up wrapping it up into HXP, please forgive the blank lines, but I'll just open it here real quick. And sorry that real quick is not always real quick, because that's the nature of live demos. So I'll open it here, and I'll use the Haxe formatter. So what I said is that if there are no, I probably don't even need that one. Anyway, so we're checking command. If you want to build or test, we're going to go ahead and build. If you want to run or test, we're going to run. So we had 2 different stages for each one of these targets. When we build, HXP has a little HXML helper class. So I said, here's my base HXML that all of them share. They all use the Lime library. They all have the same class path. They all have the same entry point. And I'm going to build them all for debug. And then I'll switch on which target I'm going to do. And yeah, I forget what that one is. Anyway, I'll switch on which target. And so then that way I know what I still need to add to the HXML. To do it for error, to do it for flash, to do it for hash link, and so on. And then when I run, depending on which target I'm going to, see here's the same code, sys get env error SDK, it's null or it's not null. And if it's not null, then we'll go ahead and use that. Otherwise, we'll use a default path, C development for Windows, and home development for anybody else. And we'll run a command. So this is where, without HXP, you could do Haxe eval, you could do Haxe execute, but something like system run command in here, this is doing enough boilerplate where it's opening a process and it's listening to the process and it's getting the feedback, it's handling error cases, it's doing nice output. This, in essence, we refactored the Lime tools and kind of broke it apart. So when you see the OpenFL command printing out commands while you're building, it's probably back here somewhere. Using colors, like all of this stuff, we're processing a library, we're creating a directory, we're copying a template file, but only if you're on a verbose mode. We just do that all automatically. So you can HXP verbose and get all this extra verbose information from the standard library. You could just not and have it be silent and just do what you asked it to do. So I guess all that to say that you use something like HXP when you want to write it in Haxe instead of writing it in another language. And with that aside, I would say that HXP is also a benefit when you don't want to write 2 scripts for 2 platforms without adding another dependency like Gradle or Ant or some other runner. And yeah, in my opinion, it's nice for don't repeat yourself, which just goes back to the first point. You want to write it in Haxe. What if I told you you could write your build scripts in Haxe? What would you give me? Any other questions? We only have like 10 minutes or so. Yep. So the question is that if took Haxe code and built it to JavaScript, so the question is building it to JavaScript using with the test written in munit, but then running it in Mocha.js. So that would end up being a little bit different, like that whole Mocha describe, Mocha it kind of structure that Mocha wants would be a little bit different. Munit, though, with a patch, for HTML5 it might make assumptions because it has this whole fancy runner where it opens a web page and then tries to talk to it with a socket and stuff like that. But on any other platform, munit just prints out whatever it did. And so without using its whole runner and its tools, if you create an OpenFL library and you call an munit command, it'll just print out the results and it'll exit out with an error code if your tests didn't all pass. And that's something that we use for command line, but in theory that could be used for the web, where it could just print out and you could have other code that handles that. Or I'm trying to think. I'm not sure if it would make sense to do like a meta library that targets Mocha in this case and targets munit in that one. I think it would probably make more sense to maybe modify munit, maybe even modifying munit so that it uses Mocha and it takes its tests and pushes it through Mocha when it goes to HTML5. I'm not sure if it would lose any features by doing that. But I would probably approach it, in a perfect world, I'd approach it like that, where we're taking munit and we're making it a little bit more customized for better HTML5 output. But if I threw away the idea of a perfect world and I just wanted to get the thing done, I probably would just make a Haxe function that's like there might be a way to do like a defined test and have it generate something that looks good for munit and something that looks good for Mocha. So you only write your test once. You don't have to copy paste, but then it can, polymorph into whatever it needs to look like. So there are easy ways to fix it, copy and paste and format a little bit different. But then there are elegant solutions that might require a little bit more wizardry. But ultimately, you guys could tell me maybe there's a better way to do it than munit, and we could all decide we're going to do that, or we could just make more investments in munit and just kind of add the missing pieces to that. But yeah, I think testing is one of those things sort of like documentation, where when you don't have it and the library's done, you think, gosh, I wish I had the documentation. Then it's really hard to do it. And gosh, I wish I had the unit tests, but then it's really hard to go back and do it. But yet, on the other hand, once you have tests, they rubber stamp your stuff, and oh, it works, and I don't even have to think about it anymore. At that moment, you think, gosh, how did I live so long without this? And I don't personally know yet how to bridge the gap between the two. The breath of relief when you have tests for everything, and then the feeling of, I need to ship my code, and I don't have time to write tests, and writing tests isn't fun, and so that's why OpenFL has like 1,000 tests. It's somewhere in the valley between those two.
So you were showing one, was it interactive layout? Like you could go back to the template code real quick and the graphic.
Uh-huh.
So is that code that would run on a lightweight platform like
Yeah, so the concept of it is live reloading or hot reloading are kind of the terms. So the question is the workflow that we saw using Webpack dev server, where I would make changes and we'd see the changes right away, whether that could work for mobile. And yeah, I've seen it done for mobile before. In essence, you end up with a protocol between the host and the client where they have a socket open and they're still talking to each other. And the client has a way of receiving new code from the host and swapping it out. And so in order to do that, you need to decouple the client a little bit. So right now, if we, by default, OpenFL's default Android target, for example, is going to be one native binary. Now, in principle, it might be possible to let the Java code be the one that knows how to boot the native code, receive a new native binary, and run the new native binary. But it may be easier or more pragmatic to try and cut it at a different spot. So we already have HashLink, for example, is native, and it's loading up bytecode and it's executing that. Nico works the same way, and Hue has made Sepia that works the same way, where your application is half compiled bytecode, or half binary and half a bytecode format that in essence could be swapped out. And so the way I would approach that today, that doesn't exist out of the box, but for a future tomorrow, the solution to that would be something where, in principle, you could have an HXCPP host application that knows how to keep communication lines open with the host, and then knows how to load and unload the Sepia module. And so when the host says, "Hey, I got a new module for you," it unloads the old one, makes sure that the memory's clear, brings in the new one, and then fires it up. So the application on the client never stopped, but it feels like it's restarting because half of it is restarting. And
Another way that you're describing it is if you load up the application can keep going.
yeah,
And it doesn't care about, well, I'll got it loaded and reloaded.
yeah.
Same idea.
Yeah, and there's definitely a technical solution for it. Even ADB for Android has commands where you can run a command and it will push a file to the device. And so even if you did something a little funny where you're pushing it to the SD card, you could do something where you have a script and it does an ADB push, it pushes it onto the SD card, now that's been replaced, and the application, even if you didn't have a protocol, you could even do something as brute force as having the application keep checking the file every second. And when it sees that the file changed, do a reload. And it's not in the current releases of OpenFL. I'd like to see it come back later, but we used to have live asset reloading that kind of worked that way, where by default, when we ran the application, that's part of why, for people who know OpenFL, why we have a manifest file, is so that can be swapped out. So the application's running, and it's watching the manifest file. We now have a file watcher in Lime, but this isn't implemented at the moment. It would watch the file, and when it sees that manifest change, it would dispatch an event and say, the assets were reloaded, and it would dump the cache. And so if you had Pirate Pig or something running, nothing would break because all your assets would still be loaded into memory, but because the cache is gone, the next time you get a new tile and it asks for assets get bitmap data, it wouldn't get the cached version, it would get the new one, and so then you would end up getting new versions of your tiles. Or if you listened to that event, you could go, oh, all my assets changed, and you could try and intelligently reload assets where you want to. But it feels like live asset reloading is something where the game or the application needs to be aware, it needs to sort of be able to be aware of it. Because you want to sort of, you have a platformer, and in the middle of jumping, you want the platform you're going to land on to swap out with your new graphic. And this is something that requires a little more cooperation than live code reloading, where we just say, we'll dump the whole thing and we'll restart the whole thing with code, which is still nice though. But asset reloading would be interesting. Photoshop on one window, your game on the other, and make some changes, hit save, and then see the asset update. So there's a technical solution to both. We just don't have it out of the box today.
Let's say, for the sake of discussion, we want to switch from a 2D render engine to a 3D render. Let's say, for another sake of discussion, it's not automatically built for your OpenFL right now, so you kind of have to load it. Is that feasible to do on something like a mobile platform?
So the question of changing between, say, a 2D renderer and a 3D renderer, do you mean like how OpenFL can render using Canvas or render using WebGL, like that type of a render switch? Or do you mean actually the application itself switching between renderer types? Like, is it something that's kind of handled at like a framework level in OpenFL, or is that more something in the user code? Okay. Well, I think the answer to that one would be that generally speaking, once you've initialized a window, the window is the window, and you can't, like in the case of, like you initialize a window, and if it's a hardware accelerated window or not an hardware accelerated window, there's no way to, because the whole idea of hot reloading is that you never destroy your window. You still have your window running, but we're swapping something out. So if you create a software-only window, then we need a new window if we want it to be hardware accelerated. But the way that someone would be able to handle switching like that is that you always have the greater of the two, so to speak. So it wouldn't allow you to switch between DirectX and GL or something like that. But what you could do is have a hardware accelerated window running software and flipping it's just doing a blit of the software texture. And that's currently what Lime and OpenFL software for desktop is currently the way that it looks, is that it's actually running in hardware, but all of your code is software, and then it will use hardware to put that on the frame buffers. So in that sense, there's no technical reason why it wouldn't be impossible to have things switch between, we'll stop doing it in software, we'll allocate some stuff for hardware. No, we'll switch back to software, we'll dump whatever we did and start blitting to a software surface. Like in theory, that should be possible. And in the browser, it's maybe slightly easier because you could just, without losing your browser window, you could dump the element you're rendering to and get a new element. So you have a WebGL canvas, you could dump that and do a 2D canvas. But to the user, it swapped out in the same place. You didn't see anything happen. So I think that hot reloading is one of those features where once you get it, you're sort of like, gosh, how did I go so long without this? And we have some rudimentary support right now. And if you OpenFL any target except for HTML5, you can do -watch, and that will try and put a watch on all of the source files that were referenced by your project, including Haxe libs. So if you're using Haxe Flixel, it'll try and watch all the files in Flixel in addition to yours. And if any of these files change, it will rerun whatever command you did. So if you do OpenFL build with a -watch, it'll exit out and it'll redo the build. If you do test, it'll exit out and redo the test. So, well, I don't have the time to try to illustrate that, but it is kind of fun. It's not quite as good as the Webpack approach, but say if I did OpenFL tests on PyraPig, and I get do it in C++, so I get a real window that comes up, and I go make changes, and then you can see in the command output, it'll say recompiling, and it closes the window I had running. It builds the one or two files that changed, and then it comes back up to speed. It opens it again, and that alone I think is good for speeding up development, because there's that seconds where you're thinking, okay, I made my change. Now let me go over to, okay, now let me run my command, or let me close the window, and just those moments that you would get spent on rebuilding it again. And so mentally, it just doesn't feel like as much time. Even though the build takes the same amount of time, because you skipped the time it took to go, okay, let me close the window, let me rerun it. Because you skipped all that, it just kind of comes back. You see it close and you wait for sort of the hesitation, and then you get it back and you're seeing what you're doing. So I think it's the future. But I'd like to see that coming to more targets. I think there's hot reloading support mostly for Hashlink. So that might be, so we have hot reloading with using NPM and Webpack. That might be the next one on the desktop that we might try to have running, so that you can just get it swapping out. And again, because we have Haxe and we can compile to almost everything, you can get your hot reload environment and iterate over your code there, and then test it on the other targets afterward. But for your daily working out your logic and stuff like that, you don't really need to test that on every platform every time you make a change. So that's honestly one of my favorite features about Haxe as well, is that if I have a bug and I'm having trouble figuring out what it is, I just try a different target. And then that target will have a different error that I might be able to read more clearly and help me figure out, oh, it's a null, it's a null value that shouldn't be, and you fix it, and sure enough, everything works now. So I think that hot reloading is kind of the same thing as well today. Well, that's my time. So thank you for sticking with me. Appreciate it.